the suggestion here is that if you have these cities, the ability to reduce your body to the size of an atom or the ability to force your influence upon anyone, you're somehow holier. And you have to question that. Are you holier if you have the ability to become heavy or dense?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I'm John Atack, and this is my good friend, Joe Szimhart. Hi, Joe.
Hello, John, and hello, boys and girls, and ladies and gentlemen.
And Joe has a subject for us to mull over, so that's what we shall be doing, mulling over a subject.
Yes, this is something that I came across yesterday while writing and about cults and the occult or whatever, and it's a notion that pervades just about every religion in some way. But in classical Hinduism, these are called siddhis, and I'm not talking about metropolitan places. I'm talking about something that's spelt Siddhis,
Yep.
cities. In fact, there's a whole cult out there or sect or movement called Siddha Yoga, based on the idea that the gurus have these city powers that they can transmit to followers during initiations and enlighten them through energizing the chakras by this magical transition. So
just in case we've left anybody behind, the chakras are 7 points in the body through which energy is meant to flow, from the head chakra down to the base chakra, which is in a rude place.
That's true. That's the most common form, but I know one system has 49 chakras.
Yes.
Yeah, there's some in the hands and ear. They're not just up and down the spine. Well, let's go on here. I don't want to get into the Sanskrit weeds.
No.
So let's get into the Sanskrit weeds this way. The first of the 8 classical cities is anima, and that's the ability to reduce one's body to the size of an atom.
Wow.
Imagine that. Alice in Wonderland. Where did she get the idea? Right?
Smoking opium. Sorry.
No,
That wasn't a literal question,
took a
was it?
bite of a cake.
Yeah, but the caterpillar is smoking opium who sat on the mushroom. So, very popular in Victorian times.
Sure. So the second of these cities is Mahima, the ability to expand one's body to an infinitely large size.
Oh, right? Yep, caught me.
One side makes you larger, the other side makes you small. So then Laghima, the ability to become weightless or lighter than air. And you can think about where TM or Transcendental Meditation got this idea of flying,
which they call the siddhis program, don't they?
The siddhis, yeah, they do. Yeah. So then the next one listed is called Garima, the ability to become heavy or dense.
Dense, I've managed.
So you can, see, they don't teach you that in TM. They kind of leave all this other good stuff out. It's just becoming light and flighty,
Yeah. Light and flighty.
And then the next one is Prapti, the ability to access any place in the world. It's kind of like Google. And then Ishitva, the ability to control all material elements or natural forces. Can you imagine that?
That would be useful. What happens if 2 people can do this?
Well, let's talk about that a little later, because now you're getting into the battle of
reasoning.
The psychics, like when Christ met Christ in the House of Lords play. Peter O'Toole famously played one of the characters. Or you remember the psychiatrist put the 2 Christs in opposition to one another, and they had this battle.
Curiously, I actually tried to watch that a few weeks ago, and I gave up on it because it was so silly. It's not great. I love Peter O'Toole, but
anyway. And the last one that's mentioned is called Vashitva, the ability to force influence upon anyone.
Aha.
How do you like that one?
Now that one I've met. It's called Tone 40 or 8C in Scientology.
Well, it's called decreeing in Church Universal and Triumphant by the use of chanted mantras. by invoking a god or an ascended master, you can enforce that influence on anything or anyone.
Yeah. Or
So,
Thelema in the Crowley cult, of course.
yeah. So, so the belief in these cities is pervasive among fundamentalist type Hindus or mystics in that tradition, and also among most of what we call the New Age movement in the West. Um, they kind of believe that sorcerers have these powers. I mean, Carlos Castaneda famously embedded these cities into his character Don Juan.
Yep.
He could bilocate, float in the air, and he could change into a raven, and he could probably become heavy or dense. He just was kind of comical about it,
Hmm.
which made him more endearing. But nevertheless, he was a Marvel Comics figure.
Yeah, and
Believed
yet
believed in.
UCLA will not cancel Carlos Castaneda's PhD, even though it's long been proven that he just sat in his apartment and made it up, and made a fortune from it. But they
Yeah,
will not withdraw the doctoral degree they gave to him. So to anybody out there who's got a doctoral degree from UCLA, what can I
yeah.
say?
Well, maybe Castaneda proved the last one, Vashitva, the ability to force influence upon anyone, including UCLA.
Yeah, didn't he in the end write something like 14 books? And after he died, there are allegations of him killing members of his following and bodies being found. And
There's allegations of suicide, of them going into what's called the Nagwal. In other
yeah,
words, going into the desert and fading away somewhere.
yeah.
That in a couple of instances, I actually exit counseled one of the inner core of Carlos Castaneda's
Oh,
group. He was a young Colombian man who was a university student that got caught up with Castaneda in the southern Arizona desert. While his followers, there were several females who wrote their own books later. And this young man was there when Castaneda was experimenting with his inner cult with what later became the tensegrity. Um, uh, it was a trademark kind of motions or movements that you do with your body that he learned from this character Don Juan, and they began selling lessons, as a workshop thing in order to practice tensegrity. Well, this young man told me about tensegrity a year before it was ever even published, and I was intrigued because he was helping, to do these movements. And Carlos would say, "Well, I don't think that looks good. Try a different way." And finally, they formulated like an art form. They came up with a choreography that was tensegrity. So it wasn't something that dropped out of siddha heaven. In other words, the primal wisdom of the ancients or the sorcerers. It was something that he made up with just human beings in his cult, and it was
yeah.
sold off as
Like
this magical technique.
like
Yeah,
Kundalini yoga, something that really didn't have any antecedents. It
right.
just somebody just went, "Oh, that looks good." Or Hitler posing in front of the mirror. Of course, that's another set
No,
of
it, you know, it was,
postures that one could go through.
right. It was kind of a knockoff of Tai Chi for New
Mm.
Agers.
Yeah,
Basically, that's all I think it is.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, but the idea that you could do certain mudras or hand movements or
Mm.
body movements and affect things in the natural world, like stopping a wolf in its tracks as it's attacking you, for instance. Uh,
Boiling peas on the stove without heat.
yeah, I like that one. Uh, yeah. So, yeah, like I've told many people after practicing the decrees from the I Am and Church Universal for about a year back in 1979, I never noticed that anybody in the movement could even warm up a cup of tea with that mental power, let alone affect something like a disease in somebody 1,000 miles away. You know,
Yeah, and it becomes so easy to believe. So when TM were claiming that the Berlin Wall came down because they were meditating, and they
Hmm.
put out their bogus study of the drop in the crime rate. I can't remember which American city it was, but
Sure.
they'd all meditated. And what they
But,
didn't point out was that the murder rate had actually gone up while they were meditating.
right.
It was other crimes that had gone down.
It doesn't matter. It's all what they can convince you of, which is the last of the cities, the ability to force influence upon anyone.
Yeah,
Imagine that.
yeah.
So these are, you only hear usually about one or two, but this last one I think is probably the most telling because it kind of envelops all of the rest of the classical cities in that you can influence anyone to believe that the other cities are real. Is
It is.
what this thing kind of folds in on itself.
Mm.
The whole litany, and and so many new religions and old ones have some of their foundational beliefs based in this sort of thing.
Mm.
I mean, in Christ walking on water, for instance, he was weightless. He was practicing one of the cities, right?
Yeah, I haven't publicly thanked you, and I should for the review that you wrote of my latest book, If Scientology Ruled the World.
Yeah, that was
What while
my
research
my my ability to force my influence upon all the readers
exactly.
that would read your book.
Yeah,
So the eighth city was in force
yeah,
there.
and
Yeah.
we've had we've sold 7 or 8 copies. What can I say? It's been
See, it
incredible.
works. It works. Yeah, yeah.
But while I was researching that book, and I've never had to work so hard in my life. I really hadn't expected to because I've spent decades studying Scientology and New Age groups and the Hitler magic, the occult. But
Hmm.
there's this assertion, a book by a Dr. Ernst Schertl called Magic was found in Hitler's library,
Hmm.
and it's dedicated, the dedication of the author to Hitler, and there are 60 markings in the margins. And this is Professor Eric Kurlander put this forward and said, at last a connection between Hitler and magic, because the connection exists through Himmler, Heydrich, Hans Frank, Rudolf Hess. They were all Wotanists and into the occult and weird things. But there's been this thing, well, what did Hitler believe? And this book, here you are. So I had to get hold of a copy of this book, and it's got the 60 markings in it where whoever in Hitler's library made those markings, and it may have been Eva Braun, frankly. But I was blown away by the book because here was a book written by a guy with a doctorate who was a psychologist who seemed to understand that magic is the control of other people's imagination.
Yeah,
And that once you control that, you control the person. Now, of course, when you look the other way, one of the technical definitions of hypnotism is guided imagination. And so you
yes,
get this, and you get the idea, I'm told, comes from Kant, that we live in the universe, but we each of us live in our own interpretation of the universe. And if you can
right.
get into somebody's interpretation of the universe and get them to imagine the world otherwise, then you can get them to decipher the world as a series of magical events, as people do say in, The Secret, the Law of Attraction, Christian
Yeah,
Science, Scientology, so many groups that I mean, in Scientology, all of these promises that were made from 1950 onwards about these incredible abilities you were going to have, the perfect IQ, the total emotional equanimity, the resistance to all and any diseases, but also a number of the cities are being promised.
yeah.
Nobody ever achieved these things. I've talked to more than 1,000 people who are in Scientology, and I did most of those levels myself.
No, no,
And
no. Hold on, John. People do achieve these things in movies and novels.
exactly, and that's the
Yeah,
important place to do it. And
yes.
and it becomes this tangle where how many of us are not using magical thinking in our lives? How many of us are not trying to will the world into the shape that we as tiny little individuals can make of it? And
Hmm.
how sensible is it to think that an individual, one of 8 billion members of our species, on a planet in a tiny little star, the sun, which is one of 100,000 million stars in our galaxy, which is one now the James Webb Telescope has observed 780,000 galaxies. How credible is it that one individual is going to have the power to, you know, tear a rent in reality and and change
Well,
all of these things.
that's what I've tried to help people with, understanding why we even believe in this stuff.
Mm.
I mean, it has some value, and let me go somewhere with this.
Yeah.
The problem comes in overvaluing all of these notions. For instance, there is some value in our ability to influence people, like in education. And so that's a small aspect of the eighth city
Mm.
to force influence upon anyone. You don't necessarily force, you invite them in, you set up a credible system of checks and balances, you certify the teachers so that they have some intelligence about what they're saying, and you make it safe, for people to learn in that environment. The problem with applying this eighth city in cults like Scientology and Church Universal and Transcendental Meditation is that they do force this influence through trickery. Usually, it's a bait and switch, and that's where the overvaluation comes in, not only by the cult leaders but also by the followers, who are tricked into overvaluing this and thinking that if they keep going and keep going, they're going to become lighter than air, or like the ability to realize whatever one desires. This, like the book, The Secret, which is total silliness, but it's based on some kind of practical notion that we have that if we do desire something and put in the effort and do realistic things to achieve it, that it's a good chance we'll get somewhere close to our goal, somewhere along that spectrum. There'll be some geniuses that get there faster, and others that fail along the way for whatever reason. But there is some value in this idea that we can realize whatever we desire, but there's a lot of qualifications with that. It's easy to overvalue that in like the name it and claim it Christians. They in the name of Jesus, the cancer is going to be removed from your body, and there's 1,000 of us praying, and if you don't doubt it, it's going to happen. That kind of overvaluation is lying to ourselves. And I think that's where the problem comes in. And I think with these cities, even in my reading of where they came from, they are based to some extent on a sophisticated psychology of what a human being is in the Hindu tradition. The notion that you could actually reduce one's body to the size of an atom is stupid. The actuality isn't real. Psychologically, you can shrink yourself down and imagine yourself to be an ant, and write a fable about that. So that part's real, the psychological part. So I go back to the idea that all religion and spirituality is basically psychological. That's all it is. It's not a science-based reality in the sense of prayer actually heals people. It may help people to feel positive about the possibility of healing, which is a good thing. But beyond that, to think that some deity you can control through prayer will heal you, that's just bullshit. So, and I think if you study the source of the cities, there is some sophisticated argument within the Upanishads that shows
Yes,
that it's
absolutely.
psychology. Yeah, that it's psychology. It's not actuality. It's not, if you do the hopping technique in TM, you're going to be able to maintain brainwave coherence and achieve this sense of levitation or real levitation.
Or possibly fracture your coccyx. I met a woman who'd done that.
Yeah, it's that whole notion in TM of people hopping up and down on mats, doing the lighter than air mantra, strength of an elephant, lightness of a feather, or whatever they say over and
Floats
over
like a
again.
butterfly, stings like a bee.
That's Muhammad Ali,
And that did
Cassius
work.
Clay, right?
That was a good mantra.
Yeah, he actually backed it up,
Yeah.
for in some fights, not all of them, but he
No,
did.
absolutely not. And of
Uh,
course, was a member of the Nation of Islam, which is not a good idea. Full
well,
stop.
yeah, he had a
Not a good
problem with
idea.
that, I
Yeah.
think. So, leaving him aside, uh, I I think you can break down every one of these cities and find some psychological reason why they even arrived,
Yeah,
because we can psychologically do some of these things. We can meditate and feel weightless, lighter than air. We can feel that. But are we in actuality? No, the scale is going to continue to tell us we're 182 pounds or 5 stone or whatever we put on there.
but we can
Um,
use our psychic powers to change the scale by tinkering with the mechanism.
yeah, right. Well, or a mechanic that comes in for $50.
That's it.
He
Yeah.
can do it for you
See?
also.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's where the problem comes in, is that skeptics will read this sort of thing and say, well, that's just all crap. You can't prove, go ahead, bring the holiest man in the world here, and we'll observe to see if he can disappear to the size of an atom. I
Mm.
mean, that's really a stupid question. And a lot of skeptics ridicule these beliefs, not realizing that they're based in some kind of a psychology that human beings need to function.
Yeah.
So it's a good idea to sometimes feel like you're not there, to kind of like just disappear from the scene, even though you are. In other words, you just shut your mouth and not impose yourself on people.
Mm.
That is kind of like the number one city anima.
Mm.
So from a psychological viewpoint, from a limited viewpoint, from a functional value uh, sense, it has some reality,
Yeah.
but on its face, it doesn't make any sense. And I think that's what cult leaders like Swami Muktananda with his Siddha Yoga wanted his followers to believe, that he actually had these Siddha powers
Mm.
in their crude form. And of course, whenever a devotee in meditation would suddenly see the Swami there, or the blue pearl floating around in front of them, that he claimed was part of that psychic soul,
Mm.
they would think they were experiencing the concrete manifestation of, like, property, the ability to access any place in the world, that he actually appeared
Mm.
in his body, or
Mm.
his soul body, or his blue pearl, or whatever that is, and that kind of experience seals the devotee within the self-sealing social system of a cult. And they don't understand, I think, that experience is only the beginning of inquiry when you're dealing with this
Mm.
stuff. It's not the end.
Mm.
Whereas the cult leader wants you to think it's the end. Stop thinking, get rid of the monkey mind. Your head is the only thing between you and God, and your heart, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Maharaji, your
It's
mind troubles you. Give it to me, it won't trouble me. You
Yeah,
don't need
yeah,
a mind.
yeah,
Oh
yeah. You're out of your
dear.
mind. But and I think you can meditate on these cities and find value in them, in the psychology and how they can be applied. And I think a lot of Hindus have done that. The more sophisticated and erudite gurus that we never hear about, probably, or rarely. We tend to hear about these bogus train wrecks that start cults, like Alan Watts, or Ken Wilber, or Bhagwan Osho Rajneesh.
Mm.
That's what we hear about. And it kind of distorts any value that some of these notions, like cities, might have in sacred discourse.
Yeah, when I left Scientology, because to me the weirdest thing in Scientology was the belief that I was inhabited by a multitude of spirits, body thetans, and I'd
Yeah,
done operating thetan levels up to five. So three, four, and five are all about, that you're made up of these things and they're not really you and you have to get rid of them. Of course, and this is a spoiler alert for any Scientologists watching. On OT8, the final level of Scientology, you find out that all of the problems that you dealt with were actually problems that belong to your body thetans and you haven't dealt with your own at all yet.
yeah,
And that's going to cost a lot more money. But because I'd come away from this thing like, this was pretty intense. I'd had a year or two of my life thinking, oh, there are these little beings, and all clustered together and stuck together. And we're misappropriating their thoughts. We're misappropriating their desires.
Mhm.
And so, which is me and where do I come from? And I remembered that when I was in Throttlehold Priory, Zen monastery in the north of England, when I was 18, I only spent 3 days there. And it blew my mind, and it was an amazing experience. And Zen Buddhism is a cult. And there you go. There's my long-term now experience and opinion of what happened there. That G.U. Kennett, who started that group, was running an abusive cult. Sorry, just the way it is. Nonetheless, the technique, the Zazen, the meditation
Mhm.
technique, was fantastic. And I was in the dojo, the Zendo rather, where you meditate, which was a massively overlarge room. There were, four of us in there, and it would take 150. And on the wall there was a Tibetan tanka, this Tibetan painting, and it was of one of these men, with gnarly teeth and all of this stuff going, really quite beautiful. And there are all these little beings around him. And I asked one
Mhm.
of the monks what this was, and he said, well, he was meditating on the demons within his consciousness. So as I left Scientology, I didn't think about any other connection. I went, oh, well, maybe he got some of it from Tibetan Buddhism. And I
Mhm.
read, I think, 5 of Alexandra David Neal's books, very
Mhm.
fascinating. And then I read a book called Tibetan Buddhist Medicine and Psychiatry, Terry somebody or other. And she'd done a PhD by studying with the Dalai Lama's physician and looking at, you know, Tibetan Buddhist medicine and psychiatry. And there was this glorious little passage where she says to the physician, but people believe that they're inhabited by Gadons, by, you know, beings. The peasants believe this, and you rub them with yak butter and it cures them. And the physician said, well, yes, that's what the peasants believe. But educated people know that they're dealing with thought forms, which was
Yeah.
pretty much what I'd come to believe I was dealing with, that these were matters of my imagination. And then he said, and of course, Buddhists believe that all is illusion.
Mhm.
And you find this in many cultures, that there are 3 layers. You have magic, which is the ability to compel the universe to do what you want. And then you have mysticism as a distinct thing, which is to try and understand what the universe is doing. Eric Fromm called
Yeah.
himself an agnostic mystic, and I've used the same term of myself. And that desire for magic, that desire for control of the world, the ultimate narcissism, the idea that I can become God, I can make the
Mhm.
world do what I want, which is essential to all of these teachings, that's very dangerous. On the other hand, the intellectual or mystical path, or the path of experience, where you're trying to understand things, is the path for everyone. It's the path that we have to take. But where we come to, I believe, that becomes dangerous is we start to accept metaphors as truth. So some teacher comes along and says this plus this is this, and we start seeing the world through the lens that they have given to us. We interpret things. So as Scientologists, when I would ask them, can you demonstrate your magical powers, your operating thetan powers? They would say the same thing. I can change traffic lights, or for anybody
Yeah.
in South Africa, that's what's called a robot. I can make clouds move,
Mhm.
and if they lived in the right part of the world, I can cause dust devils.
Well,
And you sort
one of the most common that I've heard over the decades is, I can imagine a parking spot, and certainly one always shows up
yeah,
right where I want it.
incredible,
That
absolutely
one's
incredible.
very common. Yeah.
Yeah, so I used to, when I gave talks, I'd put a little bit of tinfoil on the desk and say, and of course there will be exterior Scientologists spying on me at all times, because you have to know what I'm doing, because I'm really dangerous. And so certainly at a public lecture, there'd be bound to some Scientologist super being exteriorized to watch the lecture and make sure they could catch me out on something. So I'd put a bit of tinfoil on the lectern and say, if this moves an inch during the lecture, then I will believe in these superpowers.
Mhm.
Now, to move a cloud that's 2 tons through the sky, that would be require a certain amount of energy. Tinfoil's very light.
Well,
It
the one I
it
heard
never
about the
moved.
clouds, John. I've seen this. In fact, somebody videotaped himself making a cloud disappear. Now, usually, if they always pick these small little wispy things up in the sky,
Mm,
and they focus on that. And of course, these small little wispy things, they do disappear sometimes within a minute
yeah.
or less, because of the way atmospheric forces. So that's
Mm,
predictable. It has nothing to do with mind power. But the magical sorcerer will use that as an example of this is how you have to start. And if you
start small.
learn to do that, then you can get to the point where you can actually change the weather.
Mm,
Of course, the logical inference that is the train wreck here is that what if there are two people doing this? One person in an arid part of the farm asking for a thunderstorm, and the other one having a wedding party asking for one to have a sunny day.
yeah.
And then you multiply that by a billion people doing this around the planet. You can imagine we would end up with Venus. There would be no planet left. We would have destroyed the whole thing
Mm,
through conflicting interactions and ending up with a arid nothing,
mm,
because
yeah.
of human power of these concrete beliefs in the cities. If these cities were real, there would be no planet here
Mm,
of animals, people, or anything.
mm.
If they were real in the sense of Harry Potter reality, or
The Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings reality. Yeah, all of those kind of imaginarium things where we play with these ideas. Uh, so I think that this is the main problem is the over reliance, overvaluation of all these things, and we're all taught to do this.
Mm,
We're in the sense of be all you can be. Join the army. and, and you end up being a grunt out on some front in Iraq while you're getting shot at,
yeah.
being all you can be. Yeah, it's a
Be
real
the
good
first
come
one
on.
on your block to have your boy sent home in a box.
Yeah,
In the
yeah.
words of Country Joe and the Fish.
So we're driven by the attraction of these cities.
Mm,
We are easily conned by someone promising that, like Prapti, the ability to access any place in the world. I mean, that's kind of like the Akashic records in the sky. You can Google anything up there.
mm.
Uh, the problem, even with Google and the Akashic records, is critical thinking. How do you assess the information you're getting? Is it real? Is it any good? How do you compare and contrast? That takes training. That takes skill. Nobody's an automatic skeptic.
Yeah,
It
and
takes a lot of practice. It
let's
takes a hell of a lot of practice in order to learn to apply skepticism. And it doesn't end.
mm. And
It hasn't ended with me. Yeah.
skepticism needs to be healthy as well. That this was
Yeah.
something, 10 years ago when I was starting up the Open Minds Foundation, I looked at, the difference between cynicism and skepticism and took a simple route and went, oh, skepticism can be negative.
Mhm.
So it needs to be healthy skepticism. Critical thinking. I wrote 181 articles for the website at Open Minds, a couple of which survive. And the one article I could never finish was the one on critical thinking, because I
Mhm.
kept reading texts about critical thinking and I kept going, this is an uncritical misnomer. Critical thinking is in and
Yeah.
of itself an invented topic. It's not an actual rational system. There are many, many, many definitions of this. It's what we used to call reasoning. And I eventually got
Yeah.
back to, what's his name? In 1930, Robert Thulas, Straight and Crooked Thinking, which seems to have been the beginning of this idea of critical thinking. And it's an excellent book. His
Mhm.
grandson, Christopher, rewrote it. And it's an excellent, excellent book. But it is not at all what the people who promote critical thinking think it to be,
Mhm.
because it is very rational and it points out that we are emotional creatures. And
Yeah.
as soon as we start getting angry about something, we're not being rational. And one of the unknown facts, Thulas was a celebrity throughout the 30s. He wrote Critical Thinking in Times of War during
Yeah.
the Second War. That was a big seller. But what most people are not aware of is that the founder of the critical thinking movement was also to become a board member of the British Society for Psychic Research and a serious
Interesting.
advocate of spiritual phenomena. And I'm not criticizing that because I think those things should be approached rationally. But the idea that we can hide off into any way of thinking that will be safe, rather than always as individuals having to say, am I looking at evidence? What is the authority of the person who's telling me this? And I'm going to go on to a
Hmm.
tangent here that I've gone on to before. There is an amazing book called A First-Rate Madness. It was written by a psychiatrist at Tufts University, which is a premier university, called Nasir Ghaemi. He runs a mood disorders clinic. He has a degree in history, and he's there at Harvard Med School as well. So you know that first set of checks you do to see if somebody has the authority to say what they're saying. He has the authority in spades. He's an articulate man, a really quite brilliant man, and he puts forward this hypothesis. And this was a best-selling book in 2011. The Times Literary Supplement called it a masterpiece. He puts forward the thesis that in times of crisis, mad people make the best leaders. And the examples, he gives 8 examples of this, and he gives 5 examples of healthy, sane people. Now,
Hmm.
among the healthy, sane people, the normal people, is Neville Chamberlain. And he talks, the man who's blamed with appeasement to Hitler
Right.
in the 30s. And he talks about his infamous inability to recognize the danger of Hitler. I'm going, you've got a degree in history. I know enough about Chamberlain to know that in 1934, during the election, and Hitler has only just come to power in 1933, Chamberlain confided to his diary, we dare not tell the people about Hitler because everybody wants peace. He's the guy that rearmed. He's the guy that
Yeah.
built the Air Force, but his infamous inability. So I'm kind of going, in his list of heroes, his people who saved things, who were mad, he starts with William Tecumseh Sherman. And he
Yeah.
suggests that Sherman won the Civil War. And for me, that Civil War is still going on in the United
Oh
States
yeah.
right now
No, no, it never ended.
because of William Tecumseh Sherman. He
Oh,
does
okay.
makes no mention of the genocide of the Plains Indians, which Sherman also was over. He puts Richard Nixon in the list of normal and sane people. This man who was addicted to a variety of drugs and alcohol and spoke to the portraits in the White House. We know because he didn't know how to switch his tape recorder off. He wasn't even clever enough. So we've got these conversations. He dropped 100,000 tons of high explosives on Cambodia in 3,000 bombing raids, having said, I'm going to bring all the boys back and I'm going to be completely honest as president. He ran this
Yeah.
campaign on a non-hostile country. This is somehow healthy and normal. So even when we have somebody who is an authority on a subject, who deserves to be respected because they've really studied, they've really absorbed things, that skepticism that we're talking about, that healthy skepticism says, first of all, I'll check if they know what they're talking about, if they have the right to talk about it. And I have no qualifications, folks, so other than having spent a lifetime doing this. First of all, we check that, but even that is not safe. That when we
Right.
have authorities, we need to develop a critical thinking that is personal, that is based
Well,
upon what we
let me
actually
stop
see.
you there. Yeah, let me
It's
stop you
time
there
somebody
because
did. It is.
yeah, yeah, you really move on there sometimes. I need to put the brakes on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm taking all that in, and I think it's true. Leaders aren't necessarily the most intelligent or the most studied or the most contemplative of people. In fact,
Yeah.
sometimes they get in the way of leadership
Yes.
because they're constantly mulling over things, like
Hmm.
the Nowhere Man in the Beatles submarine thing.
Which John Lennon wrote about himself, by the way.
Yes, the overthinking things,
Yeah.
and my wife accuses me of that, for instance. So
How
I
could
have to
she?
take it
How
with a
could she?
grain of salt,
Yeah.
and I do, I
Not
do.
possible.
So what I've thrown in here in my analysis of cult behavior that I'm writing about is something which I'm going to keep front and center. It's Rudolf Otto's idea of the holy. that in order to maintain a healthy society, a healthy self, a healthy governance, a healthy knowledge base, this idea of the holy somehow, which is not definable easily, because we get bewitched by our own words, our own dictionaries,
Yes.
and we get trapped by it. But it does indicate something that's good, something that is not only good for me but good for others, and good for nature, and good in nature, and that in other words, it goes against the notion of the Gnostic rejection of the world.
Mm.
It goes into the notion that there is holiness in the world, and that if we pursue it with our own holiness, whatever that is, um, there are good solutions that
Yeah.
that can come about. For instance, in W.R. Bion's idea of the working state of mind, when you work things out, it's a holier place to be than what he called the basic assumption state, where you're in an us and them category all the
Yeah.
time, where you're in a fight flight category, where you're dependent on a leader, and you can't question very easily within that system. That's a basic assumption state. The working state is a holier state, because it's a little looser. It's willing to say with, like the great cynic Diogenes, I know nothing except the fact of my own ignorance. You're willing to say that kind of thing, even though you still appreciate the things you know and the things other people know and can prove. So I just wanted to throw that in there, that I think, circling back to these cities, the idea, the suggestion here is that if you have these cities, the ability to reduce your body to the size of an atom, or the ability to force your influence upon anyone, you're somehow holier. And you have to question that. Are you holier if you have the ability to become heavy or dense? No, you're not. You're trickier. You're more clever. You are uh, more of an influencer, but that doesn't make, none of these cities make you holier. That's my contrast here. That's what I'm trying to look at. And so this amorphous idea, and I think Rudolf Otto does a fairly good job, as much as anybody, in the idea of the holy that he wrote about, because he explores this notion in a psychological sense, and where it belongs. It's not something that's trapped and contained in the sacred traditions. It's part of human psychology. So I, I just wanted to throw that in, because that's what I'm thinking about right now. Is, how do you get around this constant skeptical breakdown of everybody's ideas of something like a city? I mean, there's got to be some room for finding why that even comes about, and what use it has, and when it's useful, and when it becomes overvalued, or when it becomes dangerous, and when it becomes stupid. You have to be able to break all that down, and that takes work, and it takes a certain amount of humility. It takes sometimes just being quiet and letting things be. It looks like we've all heard this advice. The Beatles have sung about it.
Let it be.
Love is the answer. Let it be. They were great at coming up with these suggestions.
I want
that's
money.
That's what I want. Well, that's why their songs are great. Maybe you can drive my car.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe I'll love you.
Got to get you into my life. The song that Paul McCartney wrote about cannabis.
Yeah, yeah. And the idea of love, of being here, there, and everywhere. I mean, it's they tapped our human selves in a way that a lot of groups or musicians or songwriters aren't capable of doing all the time.
No,
I mean, they did it on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and I think the same is true for, say, Paul Simon or Joni Mitchell or Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
That they do touch on something. Let me reflect upon the word holy.
Yeah, let's do that.
The word holy is cognate, comes from the same origin as the word whole, spelt with a W, not with an H, as Donald Trump has pointed out to us recently. So to be whole, complete, is holy. It also is cognate with the word hale, which is where we get the word healthy from. And so you have this thing of the individual being complete, the holiness, the haleness,
Hmm.
the healthiness, the healthfulness,
But
is all of the
yeah,
parts working together
right. But
within an
think about
individual.
the other side of this. To make holy is salvation. The salve is it's a healing thing. You know, and I mean, this is part of the metaphor of the Jesus story is that he healed people. Now he didn't concretely go up to lepers and suddenly their leprosy dropped away and they looked like a model in a cover of Playboy magazine. You know, they didn't that wasn't what was meant by that scripture. What happened was he healed the entire culture of the idea that these people were unholy. These people were just as holy as anyone else that goes into the temple to sacrifice. Lepers were not allowed into the temple. He said they were
Understandably.
after he healed them, but how did he heal them? It was a psychological change in how you viewed leprosy, is how he healed them. The leprosy didn't drop off from these people. You know, that's a concrete, evangelical, rather stupid notion of what Jesus did. You know, the healing is about changing this whole psychology of the culture about what lepers are. These can be good people. They're allowed in the temple.
Yeah,
You know, with their leprosy, they're allowed in the temple. You know, so that's what's so difficult about understanding someone like Jesus, I think, or you know, any of the great teachers we come across.
I think what you say is valid, but I would add to it that, of course, the promotion of what became Christianity, it's not a word that Jesus would have recognized, nor would he have
No,
recognized the word Jesus, because his name was Yeshu. And Christos, Christ, is a Greek word. And Christianity develops around certain ideas. And one of those ideas that, you know, when Paul goes to Greece and finds himself talking to Neoplatonists and people of highly developed imagination and ideas and, you know, reasoning, he finds that there is also a culture, you know, the major cult of the Roman Empire, the Mithraic cult, which is not even talked about anymore. But here is Mithras, who is born.
almost all the soldiers belonged to this.
Yes,
Roman soldiers. It was their favorite cult. Yeah, Mithra.
absolutely. And
Yeah,
so here you have very much like the myth of Hercules, that he is a demigod. His father was a god, his mother was a mortal. There's an interesting idea. I wonder if that has anything to do with the Jesus story being told the way it's being told. Also, of course, they're meeting people who are claiming to be able to perform miracles, siddhis. And I think, you know, in Bart Ehrman's a great place to go to really dig into this stuff. And I can't remember her name, the woman who wrote about Gnostics, Elaine Padgels. Her work is
right.
really interesting. So there's this influence around, which I think is powerful upon Christianity, which is to claim my God's bigger than your God. You know, my what I worship is more important, and the complexity there. And this has got nothing to do with what we're saying, but when you read the Old Testament, you find the first commandment is you shall have no other gods before me, not there are no other gods. And the
Right.
significance of that is that during the Old Testament, numerous gods are named. Baal is the one that people remember, the golden calf in the desert, but Astarte or Asheroth, the mother of Jehovah, or the Elohim, all of this gets very complicated about what we're meant to be doing. And what we have is something that fits into the society around it and says, again, just as with the Tibetans, this is the intellectual part of our religious belief.
Yeah.
This is the everyday, ordinary mind, non-literate part of our belief. And Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, as I recollect, says there are 5 ways of achieving the siddhis. And I don't remember them all. One is drugs, one is magical practices. And he says these will fail, that the only way to truly achieve the siddhis is through wisdom, because otherwise you will not be wise enough to use them and you will cause harm.
Yeah.
So Milarepa, the Tibetan guru, tells a story of being with his master, And one of the other novices says, I'm going down into the village to do some good work for my karma. And the master says, until you're enlightened, you can't know the consequences of your actions. You'll probably do as much harm as good. Don't do it. I hesitate at that. I think we should act as if what we do makes a difference, as William James said. We should seek to do something good. I also think that you've mentioned one of the two most significant aspects of any philosophy that will be useful for human beings, and that's humility. The other one is compassion. If you take those two things away, the lordling who wants to become emperor of the universe by having magical powers is going to be disastrously dangerous if they achieve what they want, and disastrously dangerous if they don't. That
Well,
narcissism, that drive of
yeah,
just elevating the self to power
I think
is a dreadful thing.
I think humans have known this instinctively probably since we lived in, the Neanderthal days when Homo sapiens was emerging. I I think we all know that pride comes before the fall, and
Hubris and
and
nemesis.
I think the way we know this is that even in later cultures that had medicine men or sorcerers as or shamans as guides, they would put that person to death if they caught that person lying or deceiving or misleading the
See,
public.
this is
And
where we're
this,
going wrong. If we just put L. Ron Hubbard to death, it would have been so much easier.
but the human instinct to preserve holiness and get rid of that which is unholy is pretty strong. I mean, even in the 19th century, the Navajos here would put false shamans to death because they could ruin the whole tribe with their advice.
Of course.
You could poison people with the wrong herbs. You could predict that there would be an end to the drought, and there isn't. And meanwhile, you're planting all these seeds. So the shaman had to be not only full of these cities, but he had to be very wise in applying them where and when he did. So he had to be kind of a scientist. He had to be a lot more naturally uh, not no endowed with natural wisdom and not just these powers. So there had to be a very special person to survive as a shaman in these tribes, or else they'd be killed. And I think that was true throughout history. And there was even in the ancient Hebrew day. Don't suffer a false prophet to live. Um, the I mean, of course, some of the real prophets would be killed, like
Cassandra.
Socrates, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah, whatever.
Cassandra, who says, don't
Yeah,
take wooden horses from Greeks, um,
yeah.
and gets chucked off the cliff. So
Yeah, so you get that end of
you've
it
got to
too.
guess right and be able to run
Yeah.
quickly.
But my point is that if you're going to take on the role of someone that has these cities as a shaman for any culture, you better be at the top of the game, because you can ruin a lot of lives. And we know that through our study of cults. It just happens over and over and over again. And as we were talking before we started recording, that whole tendency in humans seems to be increasing again. And people like you and I that have been dealing with this for decades feel like we're losing ground rather rapidly at this stage, and it's tough. It's tough, but the only solution I think is to keep talking about it, keep trying to educate people, and hopefully a few wake up along the way and deal with it. But
Well,
yeah,
y-
we're in very very weird times. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure how much of a shift there's been. It seems to me, and maybe it seems to most people, that when I was around 20 years old, the world was a saner and safer place. Our educational systems were better. You earlier on, at the beginning of the conversation, talked about the influence we can have through education and training. I despair of our educational system. I think it is teaching people
Mhm.
to be blinkered. I don't think it's teaching people to think. And I think it's largely based on being able to tick boxes, make the right guesses. I was talking with a friend yesterday, and she's doing an accountancy course, which is a pretty rational thing. And she said most of the material we're doing is redundant because it's the way
Mhm.
accountancy was done before computers. So
Oh.
while it might be a history of accountancy section, we're just expected to memorize it to pass an exam. I remember when you know, in to pass a psychology degree back in the 50s, you'd just have to be able to parrot the ideas of Freud. And there was even this thing about knowing the date of a particular idea. You know, when was the interpretation of the... And there is, I do believe that our education system's in decline and has been for the last 50 years.
Well, you're kind of reminding me of a reiteration of what I went through in the late 60s in college. There were all these, in fact, at the University of Dayton, where I went, there was a big sit-in to protest how we were being educated. I wasn't part of the sit-in, but friends of mine were, and they were up there in the administrative offices in the hallways, not eating for about 5 days during this thing, and you know, and then it was kind of a mess. But the I mean, in a sense, it was the you know, the inmates taking over the asylum, but at the same time, they were making a point, you know, which was, you know, we want more relevant, more useful education. We just don't want to be parroting what the professor thinks is important. You know, we want something that's a little more engaged with what we're going through now as young people, and tell us why LSD is wrong. Other than just yelling at us. That kind of education.
Having distributed it by the CIA into the whole culture.
Yeah, exactly.
And then go, no, you can't do that.
And you have to kind of forgive the universities, because they were caught off guard. I mean, the late 60s were just kind of an explosion. There were assassinations going on. There was, the fear of communism was very high. That's why we fought Vietnam. It was a, yeah.
And I mean, in the US, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, 1991.
Yeah, that was another threshold. Yeah.
There came to be a massive anti-American feeling around the world, because it became, with freedom of information in the 70s, which there was a brief window when it was actually free and not all redacted. It was understood that the US had changed the regimes of democratic countries at least one a year since 1945. Iran is a very good example that Iran was a democracy, and in 1953, Kermit Roosevelt, no relation to Kermit the Frog, but a relation to FDR, under the authority of Winston Churchill here, and it would have been Truman, Eisenhower there, I can't remember, Eisenhower. They go in and they get rid of a democracy to impose the Shah of Iran, and the Crown Prince of Iran is currently saying, I want to go back and rule. Amnesty International has said this was the worst dictatorship of the late 20th century, the amount of mayhem that was caused by the Shah of Iran. So, putting a king in Saudi Arabia, creating these situations, overthrowing democracy in Latin America, and putting in fascist regimes. We've had this terrible. So when students in the 60s, and in China as well, of course, the Cultural Revolution, when students at the Sorbonne or in Chicago through the Days of Rage, they were protesting against the fundamental hypocrisy of our society.
Oh yeah. No, I knew that. I was involved in that to some extent. I don't know if I understood it very well, but I did,
my explanation is for our viewers. I understand, you and I were there, and we saw.
But I think what you're saying is, and we're looking at the results of all this now. The Americans have been heist by their own petard.
They have been. Let's just stop you there. They have been hoist on their own petard. No, hoist on their own petard. A petard, by the way, is a grenade.
Or a small bomb.
To be hoist is the first word.
To be blown up by it.
Yeah, to be blown up on it. So
blown off the ground.
Well,
it comes out of Shakespeare, out of Hamlet. Let me, let's just go there. So, but thank you. Your English is better than mine.
Well, it's not that my memory of that particular phrase, of that particular cliche.
But all I'm bringing up is that that has come back to roost. We now have this quasi kingdom.
It's going to take over Iceland, where the Antarctic penguins live, and we've got Stephen Miller. We're a superpower. We can do what we want because that's what ethics is. Like, what?
Yeah. So here we are. We have been um, lifted off the ground by our own making, a little bomb, and it's here.
It's the last of those
By
cities
the
that we have
way,
been forced to change our beliefs and our
I
perception of the
know.
universe by an
So
event.
so yeah, so maybe there's other ways to apply these cities, like getting the voting public back in line with moving back toward democracy. Um,
Creating honest political parties, unlike the Democrats and Republicans. I mean, I was very
yeah.
surprised to find that the Ku Klux Klan was an outgrowth of the Democrats and was
Oh
stopped by the
yes,
Republicans, you know,
yes.
um, though the
Well,
modern parties,
they were the Southern Democrats
the
were very,
Dixiecrats.
very, yeah,
Yeah.
they were very different than what we understand as let's say what led to President Obama. It wasn't
Yeah,
quite the same.
we'd like to think that, but a grand wazoo of the Ku Klux Klan was both Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton's tutor in politics. So though that and the Tammany Hall that put FDR in power, I think there is a point where there has to be a break with the past. I think that the Green New Deal is a sensible approach. I don't see
Hmm.
any other sensible approaches. I think the neoliberalism of the Democrats is insane. And it has
Yeah,
given
no,
us
I
this
agree.
we tick all the boxes and make sure we're doing the right things rather than doing the right things, rather than
Yeah.
having individuals who are
Well,
presumably make
they're
decisions.
trying to sell the right things by saying the right things, but like you said, they don't do the right things, and that's been the problem, and that was the weakness, and that's why this regime came into power because they pointed out the weakness,
Yeah,
you
you
know,
can't trust those
and
other
the
people.
hypocrisy within the liberals. They were pointing that out left and right, and now we have what we have, which is
Yeah. And we're
the
going to
great
have
replacement.
yeah, we'll see whether the incitement to riot that is taking place under the I think of ICE as like Hitler's SA, these untrained yobs. That's yob, that's an English word, isn't it? Yahoos, brutes, thugs who are being thrown into the population to brutalize them into compliance in the blue states so that it would be possible to say, well, we need martial law so that we won't have midterms. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think that we face a serious threat when you've got people who they've got the test on the right hand side and they've got the answers on the left hand side to get into ICE. They get the answers wrong and they still get into ICE. So you've got this force of, this very dangerous force with the idea of we'll get people to shoot at them. You know, we'll
Hmm.
dress up some convicts in Polish uniforms, which Schindler got for the Nazis, by the way, before we start apotheosizing Schindler and his list. We'll put them and then we'll shoot them and we'll say the Poles tried to invade us. And we've got a similar sort of piece of theatre. It went on in LA, it went on in Washington to try and provoke something, it would
Well,
seem.
we had the same problem with early Mormons dressing up as Indians in order
Yeah,
to
the
provoke
Springfield
an Indian
massacre,
war.
which started The
Yes.
Simpsons, of course.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I got to go on that note on The Simpsons.
Let me
And
just make one recommendation
okay,
to our uh, 7 or 8 viewers, if they've lasted this long. Have you read a book called Religion and the Decline of Magic?
no.
Written, I think, and Spike will check this for me, I think by a man called Stephen Lawrence, who was a professor at Cambridge, published in 1971. And it's at that pivotal moment in the 70s where we think things were getting better. And he is the most incredible account of the belief in magic up to and including the 18th century. Just
Mhm.
remarkable tour de force. And you see exactly the same craziness as that we're seeing. And
Yeah.
there's a point where you get to the astrologers who are telling the King's party in the Civil War in the 1640s and Cromwell's party, and some moved between. And the way that they covered up their predictions, the way that they, concealed what they were doing. And it is so much exactly the way that contemporary,
Mhm.
pundits are teaching people, always able to get past the errors they've made with some justification and excuse. So I add only that it's always a tremendous pleasure talking with you, Joe. I don't know what is
somehow
it? What is this magical power that you have that makes it so enjoyable to talk to you? Is it one of the siddhis?
Well, of course, but I'll let you decide which one.
Okay. And please, viewers, add your own siddhis in, the ability to turn into a lemon, for example,
Yeah.
or whatever it is turns you on. Such a pleasure, Joe. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Well, very good. And on that note, I will practice my ability to reduce my body to the size of an atom and disappear
Oh,
by
incredible.
pushing a button over here on my computer.
Yeah, incredible stuff. Thanks so much.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.